Are you ready? Okay. Cool. So now that we're... Is this on? Yeah, it's good. Hi. So I wanted to quickly come up and introduce myself. You can't hear? It's... The little red thing means on, right? Very technical up here. It's okay, I speak very loud. I don't need a microphone. So my name is Trudy Bartow, and I'm the president of Brotherhood Synagogue, and I wanted to just do a quick little introduction to you this evening and kind of officially welcome you to our annual Rabbi Irving J. Block Memorial Lecture. Now, in my life, I have just a few regrets, but one of them is that I came to Brotherhood a little too late to actually meet Rabbi Block. I've heard so many wonderful things about him. I've heard so many great stories. I've read his book, so I feel like I know him, but that's not really why I feel like I know him. I feel like I know him because his spirit is here. It's here in the programs that we run, in the open communication we have, the arms that we keep extended. And for that, I'm ever so grateful that we keep his memory and his name, and we do this program every year so that people like me, the next generation, can understand who our founding rabbi is. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our current rabbi.
I want to acknowledge Herbert Block, Rabbi Block's son, as we're here with us again, and thanking Gedavelis for organizing the evening. It is extremely fitting that Phil is the guest speaker tonight at the annual Rabbi Irving J. Block Memorial Lecture. In 1981, Rabbi Block asked Phil to become the Brotherhood Synagogue's Hebrew School principal. He found in Phil, he said, a beautiful principal, and Phil, I know, in turn found in Rabbi Block an inspiring, extraordinary rabbi, a rabbi's rabbi. Rabbi Block became his mentor in many things, not just in religious education, and their friendship continued until Rabbi Block's death. He remains an inspiration to Phil and for all of us who knew him to this day. By definition, a rabbi is a scholar and a teacher, but in fact, we are all teachers and students, and we learn from each other. It is in this spirit that we create the continuity for the 62 years since Rabbi Block founded the Brotherhood Synagogue and throughout the history of the Jewish people. It is my pleasure to introduce Phil.
So it was the late 1970s, and at that time I worked for a Orthodox day school that was called Eastside Hebrew Institute, ESHI. And at that time we moved into 61 Irving Place, 18th Street and Irving Place. And it was August, and we were doing a lot of the moving ourselves, parents, volunteers, and so on. The place still needed a lot of work, and we wanted to open up, of course, when the school year opens up in September, after Labor Day. And this particular day was a weekday, and it was beastly hot. And a gentleman walks by, impeccably dressed, with a straw hat, because it was before September, and Rabbi Block knew that after Labor Day he didn't wear a straw hat. So. But shirt and tie and so on, and he extended his hand, and he said, and remember, he said, Baruch haba, welcome to the neighborhood, I'm Rabbi Irving J. Block. And we shook hands, and the place was a shambles inside, so there was really nowhere to go in and sit, but we spoke and told him a little about the school, and it seems that I think the ESHI had moved into Irving Place maybe 6 or 7 months or something to that after Brotherhood had moved here to Gramercy Park. And I had an impression when we shook his hand and we spoke. I was also impressed by the fact that there wasn't one bead of sweat on him. It was beastly hot. I don't know if your father, but it was just And the impression I had was that when he looked at you and he shook your hand and he introduced himself and asked, "How are you?" that he really was interested in knowing. And that subsequently when we would talk or he would meet people and he asked, "How are you?" How many times do we meet people and you're having a conversation and your head is 15 minutes ahead as to where the next appointment is and so on. This is just the world we live in. But I believe that when Rabbi Block extended his hand to you and asked, "How were you?" he was interested in knowing. And he also wanted to know if there was anything if you needed anything, that he was there for you. And he made you feel significant. He made you feel important. Just want to say something about hands. I heard once someone said that it's very hard almost impossible to find a rabbi that has only one arm, because in our faith we have to say, on the other hand. But just a extended hand story. Eileen Weinstein. Eileen, are you here? So Eileen told me that when her daughter was 41, was 7, 41 now, was 7, some 33 years ago. She walked by the synagogue, and it was Sukkot, and I guess she walked it, and there was Rabbi Block, and again, he extended his hand and said, "Welcome, come in," made her go up to services. And the welcome that he gave to Eileen and to Lauren, I think, as Eileen said, began a love affair between that family and not just Rabbi Block, but this congregation. And this was who the rabbi was, and a rabbi's rabbi, in the sense of meaning and trying to be concerned and so on. But on the other hand, I just have two hand stories. A number of years ago when Rabbi was here, there was a fellow in the neighborhood who wasn't a very nice fellow. He actually had robbed a couple of some synagogues, and he was a bad guy. And one of the things Rabbi Block did was, when people walked into the synagogue, he meant it. He extended his hand because this was his synagogue, and it was his way of welcoming. And I was coming down the stairs, and this guy had come in, and I saw that Rabbi Block was walking over, and I knew this couldn't be good, and I was a little younger then, I hustled and tried to run some interference, but it was too late, and Rabbi put his hand out, and he used to say, "Welcome to Brotherhood Synagogue, I'm Rabbi Block." And the guy said, "So what?" My last hand story, well, he did. My last hand story was that when Rabbi Block and Cantor Herman Diamond were the religious team of the synagogue, Cantor Leo Merkovic, who had been the cantor of the synagogue on 13th Street and subsequently had become old and retired, and he lived in Florida, and he came in one year before for the high holidays, and Rabbi Block asked him to do a part of the Kol Nidre service. I mean, he was a guy probably now about 90, but he was just a magnificent singer and so on. And back in the day, the Rabbi Block and Cantor Diamond would wear, as you remember, robes during the services. And one of the things they would do is, when the services were over, they would ask everyone to please wait. And this was the rabbi's way of greeting. It wasn't an ego type of thing. It was just as that he was the rabbi and he wanted to greet you and wish you well. So he would walk out with the cantor and he would wait downstairs. And many of you may remember this. And as people left, he would shake your hand. So he asked Leo to come down, and it was hard for him to work. So I helped Leo. So it was Rabbi Block. It was the Eastern stable. It was Rabbi Block, Cantor Diamond, and there was Leo. But I was trapped because now 1,000 people were coming out. So I stood next to Leo, and I was on his side. And then Cantor Merkovic turned around and he said to me, "I can't do this. My hand is brittle. Give me your hand." So I gave him my hand, and he put it through his robe. And wait, it gets better. It gets better. And I would accept the fact that it was my right hand and I was on his left side. So everybody kind of cleared the building, except one of the last congregants came down. I remember he looked at us and said, so those are my hand stories. But, Rabbi Alder mentioned that the basic definition of a rabbi is a teacher and so on. And there are many ways to teach. And Rabbi Block taught not only by lecture or by sermon, but he taught by living. He taught by living an example of how he acted and so on. And just some reminiscences of why I chose, when Inga said to me, what is your theme? I said, a rabbi's rabbi. If you leave services on a Saturday here and you go down to the Kiddush downstairs, you'll often see some people behind, Al Mashadre, Albert Voss, Elizabeth Wynn, Debbie Perlstein, and others. And what they're doing is they're straightening the books. They're putting the Chumashim and the Sudarim, and to make sure, to make sure that the spine is the right way, and it's so on. And, well, years ago, it was a different group. There was Adela Hirsch, there was Beth Greenhouse, there was a whole other group, and it all began with Rabbi Block. And what the rabbi would do is he too would come up, and I was watching him once, and he said, Phil, I'm doing this because it's just that I'm a neat freak. He said, how do you, and this is his whole feel of his pulpit and of the synagogue, how do you deal with something like a precious jewel? You something that's significantly precious. You watch it and you guard it, and you make sure that its impression is right. And this sanctuary is to me, he was saying, and is a precious jewel, and so you leave it right. And so to this day, as I said, there's a whole cadre of members here who make sure that the Chumash is straight up and so on. Saying that too, there was a time that wasn't a happy time. In 1989, August 19th of 1989, there was a terrible explosion in front of the synagogue, the Con Edison explosion. And during that week, I'd just come back from vacation, and during that week, there was a cleanup and so on. And I remember it was a Friday, the following Friday, and I was alone in the office. It was early, the rabbi hadn't come in yet, and the DEP came in, the Department of Environmental Protection, and they said, get out. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, there's a whole potential contamination. You've got to get out. And I called the rabbi and I said, get out. And I said, when do you think we'll be back? And he said, well, maybe a couple of weeks. And this was maybe August 26th or whatever. And we came back to the building in November. But until the Con Edison set us up in a trailer, your home was the office, and we were running in and out. And when I saw the rabbi's face, part of his life had stopped, because it was inconceivable to him. This was his pulpit. This was his mission. This was his dream, and it was inconceivable to him that services couldn't be taking place in the building and so on. Another thing that I learned from the rabbi is we would talk often, and he would say to me, Phil, people will come to you and with heartache and with, I guess, pastoral need and so on, and sometimes you have to listen. And I would say, of course, Rabbi. And then with a little subtle smile on his face, he would say, but Phil, you have to really listen. And, well, what he was saying to me was that, and I'm sure, Rabbi Alder, we've all experienced, is that, especially after many years, that sometimes you're just not there. Sometimes your head is not there. Sometimes you don't feel well. Sometimes you have a problem with your kid. Sometimes there's a chemistry, and it's just normal stuff. But in rabbis, as a rabbi, to Rabbi Block, when someone was there, no matter how he felt, whether he was sick, whether he was happy, whether he was sad, whether he was depressed, whatever it was, when you sat before him, you came with a need, you had to get the best that he had. And that's how he did it. And I'll tell you something, in the 40 years that he was a rabbi, I knew him from 1981 till till when he retired in 1994 and then subsequently when he passed away, but I'm sure it was the same in 1954 and until Brotherhood. This man never cruised. He never cruised. That from the first day on the job to the last day on the job, healthy or not healthy, he gave you the best that he had. This was a rabbi's rabbi. When I came here in 1981, the congregation was a different demographic and certainly much smaller. And I say this when it was like Erev Sukkot, and it was on a Tuesday. We were fortunate if we got at that point a minyan. And so he would make me stay instead of going home. So I was there, and then it was Kent the Diamond and Selma Frischling, who was a volunteer in the office, and maybe we etched out. And I would watch the rabbi, and I would say, well, you know, there's like 8, 9 people here. And I'm sure he's maybe not going to give a full-fledged sermon or whatever it is. But the same he did for the 10 that he did on the high holidays for 1,500, because in his mind, you were entitled to get the best that he had, whatever he could offer, and whether it was 10 people or 1,000 people, it didn't matter. And this was who Rabbi Block was. He had a tremendous affinity for children, and he lived by, I guess, the biblical quote, I guess from the book of Isaiah, a child shall lead them. Children were very important to him. And to the rabbi, and this is something that's pervaded down to Rabbi Alder and to all of us, a child was a member of the synagogue not because his parents paid the dues, but in his or her own right. That child was significant and important. I don't know if Rabbi Block ever read a book by Jerome Bruner. Jerome Bruner was a psychologist, and there are many books on pedagogy, on how one teaches, and one of the books that has influenced my life in terms of teaching was Bruner. It's a thin book, and he introduced a concept called life space. I don't know if Rabbi Block knew who Jerome Bruner was. What life space basically said was this: you can teach anything to anyone, any child, if you can relate to their life space, if you can relate to their psyche, if you could relate to their soul, that you can teach anything to anyone. I'll give you an example of this. When I graduated school, I had a teaching license, and I taught secondary school mathematics and history in public school. And I had a friend who also did the same, taught math, and he was teaching up in just a horrendous school, and all the way up down 125th Street, and there was no learning going on. It was impossible. And he told me that his was the only class where the 3rd or 4th graders could do arithmetic. So I said, what book are you using? He said, I threw out the books. It didn't work. I read Bruner. So he looked at the class and he said to them straight out, how many of you know what the illegal payoff on the illegal number system is? And every kid everyone who grew up in the Lower East Side like me knew that too. Every kid knew that if you put down $1 and you hit the number, the illegal number, this was before, legal, you got $600. So then he said, well, what happens if you put down 50 cents? Now you're in fractions. What was Willie Mays' batting score in 1954? 357. What happens if he gets 2 more hits? Life space. If you can relate to the life space. Now, I don't know if and honestly, I've never asked him, Rabbi, did you read Bruner? But his life with his congregation, and particularly with the kids, was life space. Because he wanted to know who you are. He wanted to be in your shoes. Before he made decisions, he wanted to understand who you are and where you're coming from. And I never met an individual, rabbi or whatever, who struggled more to say yes rather than no without, and this is the hard part, without sacrificing his religious commitment or ideology. That's not easy. And trust me, if people come to both, to the office with heartache and questions, and what do you do? And I watched him all those years that I worked with him, and it was in the office, how he struggled, and then somehow, in most of the cases, came up with I can say yes, and I'm not throwing out my commitment to conservative Judaism, to whatever it is. And that was an art. In the 1980s, we paid the mortgage on the building. It was $159,000. And I was sent to go to the law office I had no idea what I was doing, go to the law office to close on the building. And I remember Rabbi Block said, you go, and Arthur Greenbaum, who was a longtime member and still is, and was an officer of the synagogue. The closing happened in his office, and we closed with the United Federation of Teachers, because that's who the synagogue had bought this building, this location, from the UFT. And I remember they took the check and they blew it up, and whatever you do at closings, and it all went well. So I come back. The office was like on 39th Street and 3rd Avenue. I come back, and it was a little bit later in the afternoon, and I say, Rabbi Block, congratulations, the building is free and clear. And he said to me, quick, I want you to go to every classroom, and get every Hebrew school, it was a little smaller than, get every kid who's in the building down in the community room. No, Rabbi told you to do something either. I run around, we get all the kids, and the Rabbi Block walks over to them and he says, children, congratulations, this is your building. And what he was saying was that you represent the next generation, and your parents say, yeah, but now you'll be the follower. Hanukkah. Two people appeared at the kids program. One was Judah Maccabee, and the other one was, who was the other one? Well, Simon, all right? And the rabbi and Herbert. And here's the rabbi of the synagogue running around with a shield and a sword and a beard and a robe, and going through the whole 9 yards and so on. And he did that. He actually did that until he physically couldn't anymore. And at one point, I guess Herbert copped out one time. He didn't want to do it. So the rabbi said to me, you're on. And the one thing I do remember was that it took me a week to get the glue off. I don't know how he did it, with the beard and the stuff, but here he's, and I have to tell you, the kids were mesmerized. They were watching, well, that's the rabbi, but he's not wearing a gown, he's not wearing a robe, he's wearing a costume, and he's jumping around the bima, and we're celebrating Hanukkah. Rabbi Block was with you in the trenches. He laughed with you in wonderful times. He danced with you, and he cried with you. He cried with you in times of loss and the other side of life. And he was in the trenches. I just want to share a kind of a personal story too. A number of years ago, some of you know that one of the managers of the Second Avenue Delicatessen, Steve Cohen, was married here. And I'm friendly with Steve, my family's friendly with him, so he invited my nieces, and we were at the wedding here, and Abe, a blessed memory, Abe Liebel, catered it and was down in the community room. Now my niece, Phyllis, was getting married 2 or 3 weeks afterwards, and she was marrying a fellow who was not of the Jewish faith, and she would have, I guess, liked Rabbi Block to have, been there, couldn't, and she felt a little bit awkward, and I guess the rabbi knew that. So one of the things that Rabbi Block was astute at was dancing. Now, we're not talking about the twist or the huggabaloo. I mean, we're talking about, he was a good two-stepper, we're talking about ballroom dancing. And so they played a waltz, and he went over to my niece and he said, let's dance. And he was really a very excellent dancer. We were dancing around the community room. And then I saw that he whispered something, whatever, to her. And when she came back to the table, she had some tears in her eyes. And I said, Phyllis, what happened? She said, well, I was saying to the rabbi that I wish you could have been able to marry us and so on. And the rabbi leaned over and he whispered the priestly blessing in her ear. Whispered the priestly blessing in her ear and blessed her in a forthcoming marriage and so on. and brought her to tears. It was, this is who the rabbi was. He was also a pioneer of many things. 30 some odd years ago, he went to a meeting, the New York Board of Rabbis, and everybody at that meeting was in an uproar, because what had happened was the night before, there was a meeting at the Stephen Wise Free Synagogue. Mayor Koch was speaking, and he invited the press, and he spoke, and I guess whatever he spoke about wasn't very newsworthy, and I guess the press wasn't sure why they were there, but the mayor invites you to come, you come. And at the end, he was walking out, and he said, look at this, you've got all this space, and not one synagogue has a shelter program. The city is inundated with homelessness. Churches everywhere are doing it, and there's not one synagogue. So I guess he knew that there was a meeting the next day, and it was kind of a plan. So the next day, the New York Times, Koch blasts synagogue and so on, and of course all the rabbis at the meeting the next day were talking about all the things they do, the food drives and all this stuff. But when the smoke cleared, I guess the president of the New York Board of Rabbis said, well, but is anybody going to volunteer? And Rabbi Block put his hand up, and he said, my synagogue will open up as a shelter. And then he came back and he said, Phil, open up the shelter. And we did. And it wasn't easy, but this was part of a rabbi's rabbi. It was, Hillel, Rabbi Hillel. If I'm not for myself, who will be for me, but if I'm only for myself, what am I? And community, so on. And, he was a great neighbor. He was a great neighbor to all the groups in our neighborhood. I mean, every group who needed a space to meet and so on. And the same thing happened with different groups. We were the first to pioneer, because of Rabbi Block, meeting of AA groups, and Gamblers Anonymous groups, and Pills Anonymous groups, and Families of Depressives, and on and on and on, which was our tzedakah, because this building was his open door. So I've been honored to share some of these personal thoughts with you, and it's basically the reason why when Inga Dobella said to me, what is your theme for the night? I said, a rabbi's rabbi, because I think that in so many different ways, what Rabbi Block did was he walked the talk. It wasn't just preach and it wasn't just talk, but he walked the talk. And how many people, honest to truth, how many people at the end of the day when the race is run can turn around and say, I made a difference? How many of us can say that at the end of the day, that my family, my community, the world may be just a little bit better for the fact that I was here? And Rabbi Block not only lived his dream, in his book, A Rabbi in His Dream, he not only lived his dream, but he lived it to the fullest. He lived it with the greatest amount of sincerity and commitment. In other words, his mission statement was his life, and he never deterred. And just another thought, if I could finish up. After he retired, he would come to synagogue. It was difficult for him at that point after a while. And he would come to the junior congregation. And some of you remember that before the offices were on the third floor, there was an old, beautiful library on the third floor, and that's where I would do the junior congregation. And Rabbi and Phyllis would come, and they would sit there. And, it was difficult. His speech had been affected, and his walking wasn't great, and so on. But he would come, and Phyllis would bring him, and I would always invite him up to the Bima table upstairs, to tell a little story or something. And I remember I was talking to Charlie Rich, who said that when he used to bring his kids there, the rabbi would come up, and these kids were adrenaline. They were adrenaline to him. He would grab the table, and it would be clear as glass. We sat down, he was, you know, but there was something about him being with the kids. And one of the recollections that I have, too, is that he celebrated, I think it was his 40th year of ordination. It was a milestone year of his ordination, and I knew he would be coming to the junior congregation, so I asked at that time a number of the trustees to come up and so on, and there were a lot of kids, and if any of you who have been to junior congregation know that we do things a little bit when we call people for aliyahs, we call them up not just by their name, but a little unconventionally. Like I throw out some condition. If the condition works, you come up like, what's Phil's favorite color, or whatever. So I threw out the following conditions. I said, is there anybody sitting here, and it may be a stretch, who may have been a rabbi for 40 years, there was A, B, C, and D, who served the congregation, who cried us and left and so on, and of course he came up, and without me telling them, every kid that was there came around him when he did his aliyah. And he put his hands around them. And I believe that to the rabbi, that moment probably was as significant as if he was in the regular sanctuary with 1,500 people here, because it was the kids and so on. So these are the reasons. And there's so many other reasons. And many of you here, many of you are living those reasons because you've been with him in the trenches, in the times that are up and the times that are down, and so that's the reason that I'm honored to be able to have been the speaker tonight and to have shared why I believe that Rabbi Block was a rabbi's rabbi. And one of the things the rabbi would be, if he looking down, would be so comforting about is that his successor has taken those values and those mission statements even to a greater level. And the fact that there's a wonderful thing about this congregation, which is really seated by Rabbi Block. The fact that a 94-year-old cantor emeritus comes and sits every Shabbat, sings with the cantor, comes on Mincha on the holidays, and is welcome. It doesn't always happen, you know, new people in, new people out. Doesn't always happen. This is a very, very special congregation. It's a very special community. We've been fortunate that Rabbi Wald has been able, and the present board has been able to take it to these new heights. But the foundation and the groundwork was a rabbi's rabbi. I'd like to. Oh, hi, Howard. I'd like to read the page that's in the page is open there into our permanent book of remembrance, which the family dedicated to the memory of Rabbi Block upon his passing. Rabbi Irving J. Block, Harav Yisrael Block, born March 17, 1923, died October 31st, 2002, which corresponds to the 25th day of Cheshvan, the year 5763. Founding rabbi of the Brotherhood Synagogue, 1954, rabbi, 1954 to 1994, rabbi emeritus, 1994 to 2002, U.S. Army veteran, fighter in the Haganah in Israel's War of Independence, 1947 to 1948, dedicated in loving memory by his wife Phyllis, his son and daughter-in-law Herbert and Judith, his grandsons Joseph and Isaac, and all his family. Loving husband, father, grandfather, he lived his life by the biblical commandment, love thy neighbor as thyself. May his memory be an inspirational and a blessing. Thank you very much.
Ask that we now rise for a memorial prayer, the El Malay Rothman.
מלא רחמים, שוכן במרומים, המצא מנוחה נכונה, תחת כנפי השכינה, במעלות קדושים וטהרים, כזוהר הרקיע מזהירים את נשמת הרב ישראל בן פסח שהלך לעולמו בגן עדן תהי מנוחתו. אנא ברחמים, הסתירהו בסתר כנפיך לעולמים, וצרור בצרור החיים את נשמתו. אדוני הוא נחלתו, וינוח בשלום על משכבו. ונאמר
Zecher Tzadik Livracha, may the memory of the righteous Rabbi Irving J. Block, Harav Yisrael ben Pesach, be for a blessing. And let us say, Amen. Everyone is cordially invited downstairs for the reception.